Hello, everyone. This is Gideon Fiddleside, Editorial Director of Custom at PRWeek. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's very special PRWeek Convene Takeover event, The Future of Digital Health. Before I go any further, allow me to thank Fin Partners for sponsoring this event. The name of this webcast is very apropos, as this conversation will truly give you a sense of what the future of digital health holds. And the two main reasons I'm confident in saying that are the two amazing guests joining me today, whom I will introduce in a minute. So much of what we cover today is based on and inspired by the Global State of Digital Health report. This is a groundbreaking study co-authored by Galen Growth, an international digital health market intelligence company, and Fin Partners. The first in a series of quarterly reports pulled data from over 200 million data points and 12,000 plus digital health ventures across the planet to highlight emerging market trends, areas of growth and innovation, and market expectations beyond equity funding. I'd also like to share this one stat from the report. From $2 billion in 2011, investment in the digital health sector skyrocketed to $44 billion in 2021. My meager math tells me that's a 22 times increase. That's just one signal that digital health has become the connective tissue between doctors and patients, between pharma brands and consumers and payers. We are going to share a healthy amount of findings from this study. We are also going to cover a lot of key topics, such as assessing the performance of digital health in 2022, lots of insights into new partnerships, clinical strengths, regional disparities, and more. We'll analyze some key digital health clusters. Of course, we'll devote some time to discussing what's next in digital health and much, much more. And as I mentioned before, I have two amazing leaders joining me, and now I'm honored to introduce them. Ritesh Patel, Senior Partner of Global Digital Health at Fin Partners, and Julian DeSaliberry, CEO and founder of Galen Growth. Thank you both so much for joining me today.
Thanks for inviting us. This is exciting. He's rubbing his hands gleefully. Look at this.
Yeah. That's it's a little bit of a tick of mine. I don't want to say a nervous tick, but of course this is a health. You guys are really good in health, so you could help me with that maybe. But anyway, we're going to pack a lot into this hour, much of which will be devoted to my conversation with Ritesh and Julian. But first, some housekeeping notes. While a major portion of today's session will be the dialogue featuring our esteemed guests, you, our audience, have a key role to play as well. The final few minutes of this session will be dedicated to answering your questions. There is a Q&A box on your screen, should be upper left. Please send in your questions throughout this webcast. We will be monitoring them as they come in, and we'll pose as many of them to Ritesh and Julian as we can in the time that we have. Of course, I also welcome you all to tweet during the webinar. I think we could still do that, right?
Yeah,
we want to be trending. For now, yes. Twitter handles are, of course, I haven't checked the news this morning, but who knows? At Fin Partners, one word, FINNPARTNERS, at Galen Growth, also one word, GALENGROWTH, and at PRWeek US. You all know how to spell that one because I've said it a million times before. I'm pretty sure you're all excited to hear from our speakers, and I know I am too. So without further ado, let's get on with the main event. And let's get right into the questions. And honestly, all of these questions would work really, really well for both of our great speakers. So not sure I'm going to ask this up first, but here is the question. How would you assess the health of digital health right now with the following in mind? As I said before, investment in the digital sector went from $2 billion in 2011 to $44 billion in 2021. But in the first 9 months of 2022, venture funding across the globe declined by 35% year on year. So first of all, just based on those numbers, how would you assess the health of digital health? And Ritesh, I guess I'll start with you and then I'll ask Julian.
I think overall, it's still very, very good. Look at the numbers. It's billions of dollars. It's not gone down to 100 million, right? And I think what we're also seeing as we'll talk further in this report, there are more corporates now getting into this as a mainstream activity. Innovation hubs are being created. Digital health labs are being created all over the place. Bigger enterprises are now getting into this and saying, there's a lot here and we need to invest and get going. So it's both a investment and VCs and capital coming into the area, but also from a culture perspective, it's become a bit of a norm. And I think it's part of that is, the last 2 years and the craziness we've occurred. So I think it's pretty healthy. Julian, what do you think?
No, I think I'd echo that. Listen, there is an effective decline of, roughly speaking, 35% year on year, but we shouldn't be overly concerned. 2 years of COVID, I've really seen extraordinary years of funding, particularly in 2020 and 2021. And so I think most people I speak to seem to see this as a bit of a return to reality, with investment levels really now more akin to 2019, so pre-COVID. I think we're seeing the specialists doubling down and getting a little more rigorous, I guess, the way they're looking at the space. You're absolutely right. We'll talk about partnerships, no doubt, during the course of this conversation. But we're seeing organizations getting more engaged with the space. And we're essentially seeing those, dare I say, derogatory tourists, I guess, who came into the space during COVID period, investing vast amounts of money on a more FOMO basis, probably stepping away because they've realized that actually now we're in a difficult, bumpy environment. It's going to be much harder to get the bets right. But listen, funding levels continue to grow for early stage ventures. It's really only the late stage ventures, the big guys, who are taking the greater hit. We do sound a word of caution, I guess, from the analysis that we've done here at Galen Growth, which is that less than 30% of ventures actually raised funding in the last 18 months. So going forwards, it's going to be interesting, but we'll come back to that. And then, of course, everyone talks valuations. True, valuations are down. But I think it's mostly the late stage deals that have seen the greatest impact on valuations. And it's fair to say they're probably back at sort of 2019 levels. So it's not a collapse. It's just, I think, a return to reality.
Thank you both for that. I'm sorry, Ritesh, go ahead. Sorry.
No. I was just going to, just a quick add-on to that is, I think also we're seeing a maturity coming along. There has been 5 years, 6 years of real heady growth, sort of akin to, I got to be in this. It's $1 trillion, $4 trillion industry. We got to get a piece of it, kind of thing. And lots of people entered the market with that hope and dream in mind. But now what we're seeing is sort of a steady, more conservative, understand the market, make sure you know what your business model is before I give you money. How are you going to generate revenue as opposed to eyeballs? I think some of those things are also happening. That's adding to what's going on in general.
Thank you both for that. I had the pleasure and good fortune of actually looking at this report, and it's amazing, and I definitely encourage everyone out there to check it out. But obviously, one of the things, this is clearly a global report, of course, and so when we talk about global numbers, I kind of want to dig into a regional discussion just a little bit, because despite these global numbers that we're talking about, there are certainly disparities in investment between various regions of the world. So I'd like to give both of you the floor to discuss some of those regional disparities. And as I said, I would want to make sure neither one of you has to answer every question first. So Julian, I'm going to go to you first for this one.
With pleasure. So we at Galen Growth have a pretty unique and unmatched coverage of digital health across the globe. So we have now, since 2017, been tracking in the Middle East, Asia Pacific, Western Europe, North America, Latin America, and therefore we have a first-hand view of those differences. So if we really look at what's happened in the last 9 months, I think the headlines would say, North America is down quite a bit. Western Europe is down quite a bit, but not as badly impacted as North America. And there we are seeing resilience largely built in from public funds and government investments into the space, kind of holding out the European investment landscape. Asia Pacific got impacted to a similar level to North America, and there again, the similarity between those two regions is the gorilla in the room, really. North America, 90% of the funding is vetted at the US. Therefore, if the US is on a downturn, then we will see all of North America going that way. Similarly, in Asia-Pac, China is the gorilla in the room for Asia-Pac, and I think we're all acutely aware of what's been happening in China for the last 9 months with COVID zero and various other policies that are significantly impacting their economy, but also the ability for any internationals to be able to play in that space as well. But I don't want to lose sight of the fact that the Middle East has its own gorilla in the room, I guess. Israel is pretty much 90% of not only the volume of digital health ventures that come about, that are born in that area, but also attract the most of the funding as well. So, and there is, and I'm sure Ritesh has first-hand experience of this, a fairly close relationship between what's happening in the US and what happens in Israel from a funding innovation sort of spirit and mindset. But Latin America shouldn't be ignored. Latin America is late to the game, generally speaking, but has seen an uptick in funding in the last 9 months. So as you can see, it's very varied. And these ecosystems are all at different levels of maturity and different levels of risk appetite, but also have different type of stakeholders, I guess, as far as funding is concerned, leading to a slightly different reaction to the current circumstances.
I think to add to that, again, so it is surprising if we look at the Middle East with the amount of money that's been created in things like medical cities in Saudi Arabia, in UAE, the funding still seems to hover around Israel. And I think part of that is the startup nation culture that's been put together. The infrastructure is there, the culture is there, and there is close tie-ups between major health systems like Sheba in Israel with major health systems here in the US and cross collaboration there. So not surprising really that region of the world is still dominated primarily by startups and capital in Israel. What I would say is Europe has surprised. There was a lot of effort going on by the governments of various countries to really focus in on digital health as a new model. So if you look at what Germany was doing or trying to do with digitization of healthcare by 2025, France had made some similar sort of noises. The NHS in London was making similar noises, and they were going very well during COVID. But now COVID is abated, the eye is taken off the ball a bit because they want to go back to how do we get the 1 million patients back into the hospital to get chronic care, for example. And so some of the digital health initiatives that were created are now waning. Best example is NHSX, which was a sort of a body that was created in the UK for consolidation of innovation in healthcare that would then be rolled out across the National Health Service. And that entire group has been completely disbanded and put back into the individual trusts. So, what was sort of a place where you could go get funding and innovate and accelerate and all of that stuff has disappeared. And so the UK has gone backwards a little bit with private money coming in more and more. So those seem to be some of the regional nuances when it comes to digital health, government-oriented things, the culture of the country itself, the connectivity between markets. The Israel-US model is really good, but the joining up of those two markets and the collaboration between those two markets for startups, for funding, for knowledge sharing, for incubating and piloting is very solid.
And that's a good thing too, considering the trajectory that's happening in North America now. But I know that, listen, I mean, Israel's an amazing market. I mean, getting out of the healthcare space for a second, if you look at technology and other things, it's amazing what a small country like that has really brought to the world, and the good relationship between the states, North America, Canada too, and Israel is obviously beneficial to all of us. Now, first, I want to take this opportunity now to remind everyone out there that please send in your questions. I mean, Julian and Ritesh have already proven that they're pretty brilliant, so probably want to ask them a few things, and I'm not going to ask them. So take advantage of that opportunity. But I want to now move on.
I don't know. Julian's the brilliant one. I'm not the brilliant one. I just go after whatever he says. So,
there is no place. The only person who's allowed to be humble here is me, because my humility has been well earned. You're smart, Ritesh. Whether you admit it or not, you are. So just accept it. Julian doesn't seem to have a problem to accept that. He's brilliant too. So anyway, enough with the Jay Leno impersonation, the bad one. Yeah. Now that we've sort of set the stage of the health of digital health, both globally and regionally, I want to dig in a little bit deeper. So I want to dig into digital health by focusing on healthcare clusters. One in particular I want to note is health services search. It's a rare cluster in the space that saw a notable increase in venture funding year on year, 41% increase actually. Meanwhile, clusters such as medical diagnostics and population health management, among others, saw double-digit percentage declines in venture fundings year on year. what are communicators in the space meant to make of all of this? I think that's the best question for the audience that we have today. Ritesh, I'll start with you, and then I'll have Julian chime in.
I go back to the maturity of the marketplace. And for communicators out there, I think the big thing to take away from this whole conversation for the next hour, if I were you guys sitting in your shoes, is the general overall digital health is permeating throughout. There are pockets that are doing well and the pockets not doing well, and it ebbs and flows. Last 2 years, we saw a huge amount of money going into mental health and behavioral health. So anybody who had some sort of CBT-based solution could go get funding if they had a hockey stick revenue projection with eyeballs, right? That, I think, has matured now, and people are now saying, okay, where is the evidence? Do you have FDA guidelines? Have you tested this with anybody? Can you show me some peer-reviewed material? So for the communicators out there, those are some of the things that you should think about as you start looking at this market and looking at the people who are operating it. With respect to your question, I think it's just a movement, right? There's ebbs and flows that are going on at the moment, and there's this one area that was underserved for a long time because a lot of money, as I said, last 2 years went into behavioral health, any kind of mental or behavioral. There was a huge amount of money going into startups that were doing EEG based, tracking of brain waves for Alzheimer's and schizophrenia, Parkinson's, that sort of thing. And I think some of that has fallen off. And so this is a new area that people are looking at to say, is there a model here, or is there something we can do here in this area and category? Where I think it's going to go next year, actually, is the connectivity of it all, the platform players, people who can come in and say, I can join up this one unique use case around cardiology, connected to clinical care, connected to the stakeholders and the caregivers, connected to some sort of device, and I can give you that continuous dots connectivity for patients. And I think you'll see some money going into those platform plays or care team plays. I've got the device, now I'm going to give you people, and I'm going to give you care teams, and I'm going to give you dietitians, and all that sort of stuff. I think that some of that will happen. I don't know if I answer the question, which is why I'm going to turn it over to my mate Julian to finish it off.
So yeah, I think it's a great question, and largely because it allows us to get growth to bring attention to one topic that's often confused, and that's what the heck is digital health in the first place. So you talked about clusters and categories. So let me draw attention first and foremost as the first point to be communicated here and that is what is definition of what's in and what's out. And I would encourage anyone on this call to take a look at the report. If nothing else, look at towards the back of the report. You'll see there is a well laid out taxonomy where we have endeavored to define digital health, what's in and what's out. And then you'll see in that taxonomy this business of clusters and categories, where clusters are essentially groups of categories. And so what we're talking about here is clusters because it's easier, it's simpler, there's less of them, fewer of them. But if you look at that taxonomy, you'll see there's much more to it. So that's the first thing I would make, the first point I would make. And I should help you communicators try to certainly express to people what that digital health is about and what it actually means. Second one I'd say, that I think is the point you're making, Ritesh, and that is not all startups are born the same. So there's an awful lot of duplication, and we'll come back to that, no doubt, later on in this dialogue. But also there are startups that happen to be in the right place at the right time. 2020, what did we see? A rush towards telehealth. There was everybody trying to do telehealth. Be it Pharmaco's ringing me up or my team up saying, hey, listen, we're trying to find some telehealth companies because we can't reach the physician anymore. All the way through to this year, and to some extent last year, decentralizing clinical trials, and therefore how do you use digital health to get keep your clinical trials on track. And now, of course, a huge focus on how do we leverage digital health to improve the ever-collapsing productivity of biopharma research. So it's sort of fads and there are trends. But to your particular question in relation to health services search, I think that's a bit more of a fundamental one. And what I mean by that, I think health systems in mature economies primarily are coming out of COVID even more broken than they were before. Every day there's a headline, and for Ritesh and I, who probably listen to news in the UK a bit more often than the rest of the people on this call. I don't think a morning goes by without some bad news as relates to the NHS, the National Health Service, the universal healthcare system of the UK. People wait for consultations for hours, not being able to find a physician, etc. And so I think that, plus, I guess, the expectations of patients and consumers and HCPs to some extent, is driving people to look for answers and solutions elsewhere, which is why the cluster of health services search is actually quite a broad cluster, is popular or has been popular and is seen by investors, generally speaking, as having a bright future going forwards as people are trying to make sense of the health system mess that we're in now. And I'm not excluding the US from that either, in terms of their health systems are very clearly indicating that they're doubling down on digital health to get themselves out of the productivity and relevance issues they've got with respect to consumers and patients. So yes, there's some ups and yes, some downs. And I would say that they're very reflective of what we're seeing as a whole in the investment climate in digital health.
Thank you very much, both of you, for that. Just one, uneducated observation, though, is that I do think it'll be interesting to see mental health, and communicators are certainly keenly aware of this. Is empathy, there's another word I'm going to use for it, has become probably the most important word in the communications industry over the last couple of years, very much related to mental health, holistic health. I just think, perhaps there was a real boon in 2021 devoted to investment in that, and maybe it has sort of tapered a little bit. But I know going forward, that is going to be a space that is going to be incredibly strong, because the importance of that is never going to go away. We probably have COVID to thank for that. But in some ways, if I may, perhaps that's one of the better things that came out of COVID, that companies, organizations outside of the healthcare space, of course, including in the healthcare space, are really, really paying attention to that now, and the mental well-being of their employees, because that's so important. And that's another reason why I felt today's conversation was so important, not only for communicators in the healthcare space, but communicators in general, because like 10, 15 years ago, I know I'm pining a bit much, but 10, 15 years ago, we're always talking about every company is a media company, right? I think now every company is a healthcare company in one way or another. It's the truth. And that's why this is such an important conversation to everyone. But again, I know you guys came to listen to Ritesh and Julian, not Gideon, but there you are. Let's move on to the next question. And by the way, we've already gotten a couple of really good questions from you guys in the audience. Keep sending them in. We are going to get to them towards the end. I want to focus now on therapeutic areas, oncology, mental health. There's mental health again, cardiovascular diseases, diabetes. In all four of these key areas, venture funding is notably down year on year. Again, anywhere from 32% to 44%. Only in gastroenterology, oh God, I hate that, is venture funding up year on year, and even there, it's only by 2%. I again will ask both of you, what are communicators in the space to make of all of this? And Julian, I guess I'll start with you because I think it's your turn.
Thank you very much. Mental health is a fascinating topic, and from a digital health lens. And another other reason, to be honest, that we should look at mental health, in my view anyway, in the context of it being a subset of essential, nervous system or neuroscience, so matters to deal with the brain. And the reason I say that is because I think we will see the greatest advances in digital health as a therapy in the area of CNS, to use the abbreviation for that area. Mental health absolutely has had significant funding thrown at it, so to speak, during the period of COVID. Largely driven by the fact that I think we have seen a lot of statistics that have demonstrated that certain sections of the population are being seriously impacted by COVID and all the restrictions that COVID brought about with it. But I think an understanding of the way in which certain technologies and data interpretation are enabling not only HCPs, but also the sufferer themselves to have not only, an ability to better understand what's happening to them, but be able to do it at a level of discretion and intimacy that you probably don't necessarily get in traditional medicine, as you have to go and consult, and you have to be visible, and you have to declare, etc. So it not unsurprising that after the heady speed and momentum that it registered in the course of the last couple of years, that we saw it decelerate along with the deceleration of funding into digital health over the past 9 months. Now, it's not consistent to every single region, so I would certainly encourage people to look at the report in order to spot where mental health has decelerated more than in some regions and other regions. And usually if it's decelerated, it finds itself losing its top spot to oncology. Oncology continues to be a firm favorite for investors. It is a very large value pool. It is a disease area that's affecting an increasing number of people and for which there will be an increasing spend. And therefore, there is a necessity to find ways of managing the patient journey in oncology in a much more effective way than we've been able to do so far. Shouldn't lose some sight cardiovascular. It is still the number one killer in the world. Too often not mentioned, but it is still the number one killer of human beings in the world. And some frightening stats. I was talking to a very large pharmaco last week that has a significant cardiovascular franchise. And they're looking at digital health specifically because in the US, fewer than 30% of people who've had a cardiac event continue to monitor their LDL levels, their cholesterol levels, post the event. Because it's too much hassle, because it requires the intervention of a person, etc. And so digital health, home diagnostics, lab-to-home services, etc., become increasingly attractive to try and address that specific issue and retain some reality in the journey the patient is going through. So, these disease trends, as we see them at the moment in 2022, I think are most likely to continue, would be my guidance here. But I think the top 5 spots are fairly clear, and they're the ones that I've just mentioned, for the exception of diabetes, which, of course, is often in those top 5.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would add, it's also the nature of what we're facing and what investors see as potential large sort of areas of opportunity. Mental health will continue. I think, as I said earlier, it's going to be less about, I've got this really unique thing that's going to help somebody relieve stress, and more around I've got this thing that connects to this thing that makes mental health more holistic. And therefore, that's going to get more funding and better funding than just this one-off thing that's going to get maybe 100 people using it and eyeballs generated, right? So where's the evidence? Show me some clinical evidence. Show me the revenue model or a business model, and what are the partnerships looking like? So you're going to see more health system getting into that space. I think there are also things that are being disrupted, right? You've got companies doing what I call the Uberification of these things. So Your Health Coach is one of those companies that's amassed a massive amount of health coaches, independent health coaches. So now you go onto their platform, you say, I need a health coach for a day, a week, a year, an hour, whatever you want. And they'll match you based on your requirements to the right coach. So you, the consumer or the patient, don't have to go find somebody, or your doctor doesn't recommend somebody. You can go onto Your Health Coach platform and do that. We're seeing a similar thing going on in obesity and dietitians and fitness and even psychiatry, where psychiatrists are now saying, I'll be psychiatrist on demand. You don't have to come and see me in my office and sit on the couch. You want a telemedicine thing for an hour? We got you. The people at Wobot, who started very early on as a chatbot on Facebook, just raised some money, and I'm glad to see their platform's doing really well. So it's a combination of chat. I just want to talk to somebody. Wobot early on used to send me a picture of a hedgehog every morning, a little baby hedgehog. Hi, how's it going? Cheer up, that sort of stuff. Now they've gone into a complete model with on-demand psychiatrists as well. So those kinds of things will continue. Countries are looking at obesity primarily, connected to diabetes, connected to overall health. So you're going to see more and more of that coming through. Novo Nordisk is making a massive play in obesity. They think there's a massive issue that they can address from both a digital therapeutic as well as a drug perspective. So I think diabetes, gastro, those kinds of things will continue growing because it is a global epidemic.
Again, just fascinating stuff. And again, I just encourage everybody to check out this report because, as you'll see in the next question that I have, some really impressive, interesting numbers as well as just the topics that Julian and Ritesh are talking about. Just fascinating, seriously. And again, keep sending in those questions, please. Just another reminder. So now, according to Galen Growth, there were 2,246 new digital health partnerships in the first 9 months of 2022. With 1,475 of them in North America. We've talked about partnerships quite a bit already in today's webcast. Let's talk a little bit more specifically about it. From the clusters those partnerships are in to what those numbers mean for the present and future of digital health, I'll give you both the floor to discuss with our audience the state of new partnerships in digital health. I've honestly lost my place with who goes first and who goes second. Ritesh, I think it's you, so I'll let you go first.
All good. I was going to let Julian go first, but I'm happy to do so. So, because I spoke a lot on the last one, but again, I think more interesting. It's not just the partnerships, but the types of partnerships that are going on. Before there was a lot of pilots happening. Let's go do this, let's go do that. I think what's happening now is you got two categories of people that are really jumping in with both feet. One is the health systems. They've now started to figure out that they can't build it themselves, but there are lots of people that they can go partner with. So there are a number of health systems here in the US, as well as in Israel with Sheba, as I said earlier, who's pioneered this model around how a health system could potentially partner with digital health providers to then provide whatever it is to their patient population rather than having the payer do it, right? So that's one area. So they're now, health systems are coming in saying, I'll take this on. I know my patients best. My physicians know my patients best. And then I'll go find the payer to work with to see if they'll reimburse this thing. So those partnerships are starting to happen. The other area is the corporates are starting to also realize that there is a model here. Lots of people, particularly in pharma, did the whole, we'll go do a digital therapeutic ourselves and realize that maybe that's not the right idea or approach. Beyond the pill services are back in fashion, right? Let's go partner with somebody who can then give us a thing that is a augmentation to the drug. So AliveCore and, Novartis, the handheld EKG with an AFib sufferer. So if I'm a doctor, I'm prescribing Eliquis, make sure you also recommend the AliveCore handheld EKG so they can track their AFib. Those kinds of partnerships are starting to occur, both at the brand level as well as the corporate level. So I think that's what's driving a lot of this is a lot of the mature organizations are saying it's better to partner than to build ourselves. Except for one company, there's always one company. I think Pfizer still believes they can build everything themselves. And then on the hospital side, the recent announcement at Health, where 15 academic centers are going to collaborate on platforms and partnerships with funding from General Catalyst as the main capital provider. Fascinating stuff. Right? How do you get 15 academic center CEOs together and get that done? And now what's that going to look like? So you'll see some interesting partnerships coming out of that model.
Very interesting stuff indeed. Julian?
Yeah, listen, I think a few other anecdotes to sort of add to that. One, it's great to see partnerships continue to grow during 2022. Yeah. I was fearful simply because to add to another, let's say, criticism of many of these corporations, I watched so many in the last year or two just go through restructuring programs rather than taking the opportunity to make a bold move commercially. So I was very, very pleasantly surprised to see the continued number of partnerships continue to grow in 2022, despite all that uncertainty. We've got to remind ourselves that a large proportion, in fact, the larger proportion of digital health ventures are B2B2P, so business to business to patient type models. And therefore, there's a need for a partnership with a larger organization in order to scale and I guess, prove the business at a commercial level and get that reach with patients. We shouldn't lose sight of something I was saying a little earlier on. I think that COVID has, rewritten the expectations that consumers, patients, and HCPs have Therefore, it's forcing the incumbents, the pharmacos, the health systems, and all those names that Ritesh had mentioned, to improve their relevance to themselves, whilst at the same time improve their productivity. And at the moment, it's particularly acute because, of course, we keep hearing about the tight labor market. And so all these things are really driving the organizations, including corporates, towards digital health innovators and vice versa, as both realize that they are critical to each other's future. One quick plug, if I may, just to sort of build on that and look at partnerships. We've literally Tuesday this week, yesterday, in fact, published our annual analysis of the quality of the portfolio of partnerships that pharmaceutical companies have been building over the last few years. So this is our annual review. So it's an update on the last year. So it's a 2022 version. I won't spoil the story. I'll let people go to our website, download it for free. But it is an extensive analysis of the top 25 pharmacos, looking at our digital health portfolios and assessing the quality of the portfolio, as well as its alignment to the strategic direction of that pharmaco. And it's a very interesting read as to who fell out from the top 25 last year versus who the new entrants are for 2022 versus those that are not as well ranked as the others. But I will let people discover that for themselves. But it adds yet more value to the fact that large organizations, as Ritesh was saying, have for a number of years been trying to experiment with partnerships partnerships with digital health ventures with varying levels of success so far.
Thank you so much, both of you.
I've got bad news for you, Julian. I've been tweeting up a storm about this digital health pharma report. So I'm sure you're getting a huge amount of, hopefully 2 or 3 people downloading it already.
Yeah, I think we just exceeded 3. I'm probably on 4 now, Ritesh.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you mentioned it.
Thank you very much for tweeting.
Okay, I'm not tweeting at the moment because I'm supposed to be hosting this, but everyone out there, check out Galen Groth's website. Okay, so clearly, as I've said this before, go to Fin Partners' website too, whichever one you want, both of them, of course. But as you can see, I don't think I've ever come across 2 people, honestly, who could put the state of digital health in the context that you have. I could just imagine everyone out there taking furious notes. I mean, I would be doing the same if I wasn't so focused on what I was doing here. But this is really a fascinating conversation, and we're going to continue it for the next few minutes. And your questions are coming in. I've seen a couple of really interesting ones, so definitely want to get to those. But back to the script, as it were. A key barometer of the success or lack of success when it comes to the kinds of ventures we are talking about today in the digital health space is clinical strengths. How are those determined? What are some of the numbers indicating clinical strengths among recent partnerships? And again, why is this important for communicators in the healthcare space? I didn't lose my place here. It is supposed to be Julian first. I know both of you were saying a lot. You're offering so much, but I'm trying to keep some semblance of order here. So Julian, I guess I'll let you go first here.
And I'm really glad to be starting this one, largely because this has been a hot topic of focus for the Galen Groth research team and its clients for some time now, but there was a particular hiatus in September when we published a 60-page report on the clinical evidence of digital health across the globe, and we assessed some 12,000 digital health ventures to understand their clinical evidence. Now, back to your question, though. We believe clinical evidence is important now and will increasingly become important going forward. And I think that is largely by the fact we're moving more and more into an environment of proof points. So digital health ventures need to prove what they are claiming to be doing versus the environment we're in last year and the year before, which was a great compelling story, would attract a FOMO type investor. So anyway, that one of those proof points will be clinical evidence. And what we did at Galen Groth is take a very quick look at what are digital health ventures doing to demonstrate, to be able to demonstrate. And of course, the obvious data points in front of us and the ones that we considered in terms of our analysis and our assessment were, well, if we look at a digital health venture, what has it done by way of regulatory filings? was it done or obtained by way of regulatory approvals? What clinical trials has it been running to achieve these approvals? And of course, last but not least, what sort of peer-reviewed journals have been published to continue to demonstrate to the wider world what that digital venture is trying to achieve? Now, the caveat here is that clinical evidence is not necessarily required for all digital health ventures. There are some perfectly good wellness apps out there that are very useful to the end user, but don't need a clinical evidence really of any type, either regulatory wise or just to certainly prove themselves to their own users. So that's the caveat there. But if we look at that particular proof point called clinical evidence, then you start seeing some clear, what I describe as a generally underweight state of digital health when it comes to clinical evidence. As an average across the globe, clinical evidence, I would suggest that less than 20% of digital health ventures across the globe have what I would call a substantiated or significant clinical evidence level. Now, I could get into far more detail, but it's probably easier for our audience today to reach out to to the report where they'll see the summary of that analysis. But if they want to see the mechanics behind it, they should download the clinical evidence report that you'll find again on our research page at the Galen Growth website, which will really go into the methodology that we use and the mechanics behind it. But the summation of all this is that clinical evidence is increasingly important and will be, in my view, an enormous focus for CXOs of digital ventures, as well as for the partners we talked about in the last question, and of course the investors as they look to invest more smartly.
You know, I get the sense that, I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry, Ritesh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, go for it. You first, sir.
No, actually, I was just going to say something sort of silly that I feel bad for I feel bad for each of you that has to go second in each question because the first answers have always been so good, but each person who's got second has added something. So Ritesh, now's your chance. That's all I had to say. So go ahead.
I would say if for the people listening, put them into three categories, right? You're going to have consumer-oriented wellness apps coming no matter what. There are always somebody new that will come along that has got something. There is a movement for all of you who are following health and wellness categories around the continuation of people collecting data on themselves, the Oura Ring, the Apple Watch, the Garmin, the Fitbit, even if you look at the continuous glucose monitoring systems, a lot more athletes are now using CGMs to keep an eye on their blood sugar levels, right? So that wellness category in general is exploding and doesn't really necessarily need clinical evidence because it's just tracking of habits or things, right? Then you've got the middle tier where there is a quasi clinical but not so clinical. You may want to do some clinical studies around it. And the Apple Watch is a prime example that when they started going into the EKG world, all of a sudden, you know what, we may want to get some evidence around, does this really work? And then you've got the real hardcore clinical evidence stuff that you have to do because somebody may die if you don't, right? And so, there are some folks who are in that category. And we are now seeing more and more funding and work going into that third category, that third area, because it is hard. You have to raise a lot of money to go get this thing tested. You have to have a bit of capital behind it to ensure that you take the time to do it properly. The studies are long. You're talking 2-3 year studies. It's not just, I'll test it on 20,000 patients for a month and tell the FDA it works. Yay. FDA doesn't do that sort of thing, nor do the NHS or the German National Health Service or any of those guys. So I think that's how it's going to blow out. And if you look at those, there's a lot more people going into that. I'm clinically trialing this stuff because there's more money to be made there as well. The return is greater as well. Because on the consumer grade, right, how many watches do you need to sell? And who can? If I want to enter the connected watch business, I'm pretty much dead, right? So you've got Apple, Garmin, Fitbit. Unless I have something very unique, it's going to be very difficult to get anything funded for a watch that tracks something. But if it tracks my blood glucose level and connects it to my diabetes, that connects it to my weight loss program and makes me live better, but I need clinical evidence that says this thing will reduce your A1C level, and you have to prove it, there's a market that's bigger. Health systems will buy it, pharma will buy it.
Yeah, no, I very much appreciate that. And while I completely understand that, clinical evidence in some cases is probably not necessary, though it's still a very important subject because I think a lot of people are looking for the easiest way to get the best results, and some of these products are like that. Like, oh, I could buy an Apple Watch; it's really going to help me live better. You're really trusting Apple with some very important things, a lot more important than just telling what time of day it is. So, while clinical evidence might not be necessary, it's still actually good to have it. The more deep these companies get into these areas, and actually, right. I don't always do this, but I want to go to one of the questions from our audience now, because it actually, what we just talked about segues really well into this. So, one of our attendees today is mentioning actually, digital health is an interesting space because it bridges healthcare and tech. Yes. What we've seen and discussed, but what we've seen and what we've discussed today, we've seen movement by both startups and big pharma. But we're wondering, what are your thoughts on big tech players in this space, such as Oracle or Amazon, or I guess I could add Apple to that. So, or Google, actually Google Health, things like that. What are your thoughts about that as it pertains to this conversation we're having today, Julian? No, actually, Ritesh, I think it's your turn to go first. I'll let you go first.
Okay. So you've got what was dubbed, I think, the FAMGA crowd, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and Apple, right? And then you've got the non-FAMGA people, which is Oracle and SAP and those guys. What you're seeing from the big software players, the ERP players, the people who are doing the plumbing and those kinds of things, is really connectivity things. How do I connect things? Oracle buying Cerner is getting into the whole connectivity of the digital health record. How can I put the plumbing together, and what can I do to put it together? And CMS doing the open data rule now enables Oracle to monetize some of the Cerner data by giving access to your health record, right? The FAMGA crowd is the one you got to watch for, including Amazon. Facebook, I think, is pretty much over. I don't think anybody will trust them with your data anyway. So I think it's going to be all around communities. Communities still thrive very much on that platform. People like me, the rare disease category is huge on Facebook. So I don't know. I think that will continue. I don't see any abatement going on in using that platform to connect people together, right? From community building, people like me, and things like that. So Google is definitely making a play in two areas. One is around research with Project Baseline and all the things that they're doing in collecting data. I think they've had about 25,000 people. Their ambition is to have 200,000 across the world. They've just made a big, massive push media-wise and PR-wise in Europe to get people to sign up for Project Baseline to track their data. So I think that's where they're going, is the data collection, the clinical trial stuff, as well as what they're doing in search, using their core capability to give physicians access. It's sort of a user interface over your EHR, because the EHR is so clumsy anyway. So now Google is providing a Google interface. So you just type in your search and it goes back and gets the data and brings it in front of you. So how do they do that? But I think people to watch for, definitely Microsoft and the use of AI and some of the AR VR stuff that they're doing in radiology, etc., really is fascinating. And I think they'll make a big change from a platform perspective. And then finally, Apple. I think they're going to, I say this in every presentation I do, Apple's going to own the patient, because we patients love Apple. Right. And then you've got a device, there's 2 billion people with an Apple phone, watch, whatever. There you go. So I've got a distribution system in a phone or a watch. I've got the infrastructure that's completely integrated. Right. I can push whatever I want to you. So let's look at maybe a redefinition of the App Store is my prediction next year, with a whole new health App Store, just specifically dedicated to health. Now that I've got the infrastructure in play. Apple was the first one to allow me to have access to my electronic health records through City Summit MD. So I think they'll own the consumer.
I think they already do, but fair point. Julian, what are your thoughts on these big tech players in the digital health space?
We've been watching them with interest, largely because they seem to have sort of a bit of a hit and miss and a trial and a approach to digital health and a bit of a schizophrenic attitude sometimes. But wanting to not repeat what Ritesh has carefully illustrated as some of the activities they've been undertaking. They have tried and failed in various areas. I think they do have an immense potential to fix some of the issues that the healthcare system has, particularly in relation to its relationship or the interface and relationship with patients. So in fact, there's a fascinating blog written by A16Z, the venture capital firm, I think Boston-based venture capital firm, on the big company of the future, which effectively is talking about who will win the healthcare interface, I guess, from an innovation perspective. Will it be Amazon because it's so good at customer management, or will it be a completely different player? We have mixed feelings about them because I think they see external innovation around them as more an opportunity to sell them cloud services rather than building a better platform for specific patients by looking at innovation around them and what they can bring to that table. I'm hoping that will evolve a little bit going forwards. But that said, there's been plenty of attempts by them to try and modify the system they're in. I think everyone watched with interest the joint venture between Amazon. Was it Amazon, JP Morgan, and who was the third in that particular
Berkshire Hathaway. Berkshire Hathaway.
That's right, yeah. And there was some great hope there in terms of the sheer power of purchase and the large size of that organization to change some of the rules. But a couple of years later, it has been disbanded. So I think they've all concluded that healthcare is much harder than they initially thought. The trend that I'm seeing certainly is that they're applying what they're very good at to healthcare, as opposed to trying to turn the whole thing on its head. So to your point, Ritesh, for example, Google search and leveraging their sheer horsepower to try and make some sense of the massive data sitting in healthcare not being used, usefully for example, resource allocation, disease management, etc.
SAP has been very proficient and prolific in the back-end operations. So they've been backing a lot of, the SAP IOs. There are a number of them out there, which are their incubator innovation hubs. They've brought people in from the healthcare specific side to say, what can you add to the SAP infrastructure? So I've seen companies that do, to your point, Julian, resource management on SAP, robotic process automation for SAP, so that I can take all of the mundane tasks that are happening and use automation and workflow to do that on the SAP platform. So for the big tech guys, to answer the question earlier succinctly, is they'll do what's best in their interest for what they have as a core and how they can add onto it. The only companies to maybe not look at that or will do it differently are the Amazons and the Best Buys of this world, or the Walgreens and the Walmarts of this world, who are looking at maybe disrupting the GP businesses, right?
True. We're very interested in watching NVIDIA, the unknown tech player out there. NVIDIA, for those who are not familiar, are a chip manufacturer with a specific focus on artificial intelligence. And I think they're basically taking a leaf out of the Intel Inside strategy with a view to being essentially the go-to AI chip for digital, where AI has been used in digital health. So we're watching that one with a great deal of interest.
Mm-hmm. Thank you both for that. And, the time has just flown by. We only have a few minutes left. And what's great about having wonderful speakers like Ritesh and Julian is they get so in depth with their answers that sometimes they answer some of the questions I was going to ask them before I get to ask them. That's actually a good thing because I want the last question we tackle today most likely to be another audience question that we have. And this will be interesting because I think we're looking for your advice. We're looking for your advice on an interesting issue here. So rural, easy word for me to say, rural areas of the United States have a great need for digital healthcare. However, there are issues there. Like internet service is really poor or unavailable in so many rural areas. So what can be done to help rural areas be part of the digital health revolution? And I think it's an important question because the United States, which is where most of our listeners are today, there are a lot of rural areas in the United States. So, I know there are a lot of people trying to tackle this issue, but you guys are really smart. So I'm curious, what do you think can be done about this? Ritesh, I guess you might have gone first last time. I'll let you go first again, then we'll turn it over to Julian. So what can be done here?
Well, I'm going to do two things. I'm going to do a plug because we at Fin have actually created a whole initiative around rural health. This is a big passion for us here at Fin, and we are getting into it with both feet and plunging headfirst into the deep end of the pool of this thing. I would say there are three things going on and companies looking at this. One is around connectivity. That's the most important one. Mm-hmm. You know, the original intent of the CARES Act, particularly as it becomes to access, was to be able to provide the capability for providing access, digital access, Wi-Fi, 3G, 4G, whatever you want to call it, but giving me the ability to do that. The second thing after that is what tools, technology, and platforms can we use to do this. So here's where it's going, I think, and I think this is a very important subject. As I said, we at Fin have plunged into it with both feet. There are government bodies such as the FTC, CMS, and even the CDC in Atlanta looking at what can we do to either fund or subsidize connectivity. There are companies such as Qualcomm who already have an infrastructure out there for 3G. So can they create cheaper Android 3G connected devices? Because you can get 3G service. I sent a note not too long ago to Tim Cook at Apple saying, wonderful news about this SOS thing you've got going on Apple. Can I use it for healthcare? As opposed to just SOS? Can we give nurses iPads and the reservation in South Dakota so they don't have to drive 300 miles to a Starbucks to upload and download data? So I think there are companies that are out there that are looking at this thing. And I think there's enormous possibility and potential if you put the right people together with the right technologies to be able to do the provision of care. Hell, Rwanda, Ghana, Botswana, South Africa, Uganda do delivery of digital care using text messages on cellular networks. So if they can do it in Africa, why can't we do it in Wyoming and Montana and West Virginia? Part of it is obviously the access piece. But, you know, I think there is enormous potential, and there are lots of people who over the last year have really started to look at this as a imperative, including the government bodies that are involved, such as the FTC, particularly on bandwidth, right?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Julian?
Yeah, just building on that. Listen, I founded Galen Growth in Singapore when I lived there for a number of years. I lived in Asia for 18 years. So I'll borrow straight from Ritesh's answer, which is one of the things that rural areas, or more specifically those people trying to solve those problems, need to do is to certainly not fall into the trap of trying to find the latest technology to solve the problem. Look elsewhere at Africa and many countries in Asia Pacific and figure out how they're solving the problem. So that's be my first recommendation. Second recommendation is, use technology and ingenious innovation to your advantage. So how do you recognize the fact that bandwidth is low and therefore adapt or modify your connectivity needs to a low bandwidth? There's reasons why WhatsApp is one of the most popular tools in certainly Asia, is because even if you're on 2G, you can still pass messages around on WhatsApp. Yeah. You can't do that on many other platforms. They usually just conk out unless you've got 4G on your screen. So and there are plenty of digital innovators out there who have figured out how to move a high-res radio from one device to another on a low bandwidth connection. So I guess that would be my second recommendation. Third recommendation, which was brought loud and clear with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and that's networks like Starlink, which have very convincingly assured us that they can provide the necessary coverage to allow, vast rural areas or disconnected areas to be able to communicate, even if a system has been taken down. So how do we achieve that in those rural areas? How do we achieve access to those type of networks? 5G, of course, is coming along, but of course that will probably be a while before it arrives in all rural areas. Which leads me, I guess, to my fourth and final recommendation, which is, when we look at funding or the allocation of funding to health systems, there is often a drive towards, of course, a more conventional spend, which tends to eat most of the funding up, but also to sort of leaping down the road at the latest shout technologies, which aren't always appropriate for rural areas or certainly low-income areas. And therefore, what percentage of funding goes towards putting in place the infrastructure to allow digital health type solutions to be used by rural areas, which frankly are prime. If you're sitting in a rural area where the nearest physician is 100 kilometers away from you, 100 miles, sorry, for the benefit of your audience, you got choices. You send an ambulance or a taxi at vast cost, taking hours, or you get on a handset. So there's got to be some rethinking of where funding goes so as to be able to provide healthcare in a smart and in an innovative way.
Thank you both so much for that, and I'm actually glad I ended there because that really is an issue. So I appreciate the question, and clearly I appreciate the answers. But clock on the wall, no matter what part of the world you're in, tells you that we're past the hour already, and this went by so quickly. Not surprising, just a great conversation. On behalf of PRWeek as well as our audience, I sincerely thank Fin Partners for sponsoring today's event, and of course, much gratitude to Ritesh and Julian for taking time from their very busy schedules to join us today and share their clearly vast expertise. I also want to thank all of you, our audience. I truly appreciate your participation today. I hope you got as much out of this virtual event as you were hoping, if not more. I want to make a note right now because it's important. This report that we've been talking about, it's really a fascinating report, and I welcome all of you. In fact, I encourage all of you to go to either Galen Groth's website or Fin Partners' website. In Fin Partners' website, it's the News Insights section where you could see this global state of digital health report. It's really a fascinating piece. I strongly recommend all of you take a look at it. We will also email it to all of you.